Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on another episode of From the Vault, BitGo's podcast. My name is Mindy, product marketing lead here at BitGo, and today I'm joined by Norma Chu, founder and CEO of DDC Enterprise Limited. DDC Enterprise is a leading global Asian food platform and digital asset company founded in 2012 and has recently adopted Bitcoin as its core reserve asset. So thank you for joining us, Norma. Very excited to talk to you.
No, thanks for having me, Mindy.
This week, marked International Women's Day. So it's especially meaningful to have you on with us today as the first female CEO of a digital asset treasury company and the leader of the largest digital asset treasury company in the space. Your perspective is definitely very timely. So I would just love to start by hearing about your journey and how you started DDC and how you discovered Bitcoin and what it was like being a founder and building an empire and living your passion.
Maybe I'll start by giving a little bit of background about myself. I was born and raised in Hong Kong, but I grew up in Seattle, Washington, since I was 12. And then after a number of years, I moved back to Hong Kong to pursue my career in finance. And, growing up, I've always only had two true passions. One is the stock market, and the other one is, watching Food Network and cooking. And I would say that I'm very fortunate, in the very earlier part of my career, I got to be focused in finance, starting out in investment banking and then later on equity research. And afterwards, now I've been able to build this business really focusing on cooking and food for the past, 14 years. And now adding Bitcoin on top of it is kind of like bringing food and Bitcoin and finance all together again. So it's been a very amazing and rewarding journey for the past, a little bit over a decade. In terms of my journey and personal experience into Bitcoin, I started investing in it in 2021. And at first, it was very experimental. That year, I think, was unique for the Hong Kong market, where that we saw a lot of, Bitcoin capital and also Bitcoin talent coming into the city from the mainland China market. So having a close group of friends from my back in the investment banking days, we all invested in Bitcoin and a number of NFT projects that year. And of course, when I look back, Bitcoin is the only asset now that I've invested that year, still have very meaningful value and also still growing. A few years later, in 2024, a year after I listed DDC on the New York Stock Exchange, a very close friend and also long-term investor suggested that I take a look at, MSTR. And so I was like, okay, I've never, never heard of strategy at that time. So I put back on, my strategy, my equity research hat and really look into the understanding their business model and playbook and how, acquiring a scarce digital asset like Bitcoin can transform corporate treasury. And I think that was, when I started really looking deeper into how to connect, Bitcoin's unique characteristics of having the 21 million hard cap and a decade long of outperformance against other major asset classes with our more traditional underlying food operating business. And I think one of the major positive that stood out is by incorporating Bitcoin as a corporate treasury strategy, we can finally really protect what we've built for over a decade now, a growing and profitable business against inflation, counterparty risk, and also currency debasement.
I myself too have two passions. I would say they're also food and finance. So I
Awesome.
love I love this shared ground. I think it's interesting your background, just given your background in research, right? And going deeper into like Bitcoin, how you mentioned, and what was it that kind of stood out to you most? And like what influenced that pivotal moment that made you decide that this was like the right move to make?
I think like every major strategic decision that I've made in the past, for DDC, first of all, I think I personally have to really fully understand it and have strong buy-in myself before I bring it to the board and communicate, my vision for why we want to add, Bitcoin treasury strategy on top of the DDC's operating business. And subsequently getting the board approval also to communicate this vision, to the broader market and our investors. 21 million hard cap, I think that's the most important thing that stood out to me because, internally with our board, we also, debated about what about other cryptocurrency. But I think for me, that's the most important to have that limited supply, right? I think that's the most important characteristics that stood out for Bitcoin, at least for me, because that truly can help us defend any kind of potential devaluation in its value over the next years to come or in the future. Second, I think is, I really believe in track record, as a equity research background, and just looking at Bitcoin's resilience. I've observed it for different cycles, right? 2018, 2022, 2020 and 2022. I think every time Bitcoin comes back stronger and more resilient, and I think having that record of, over 10 years of outperforming other major asset classes was really important, especially especially for me at DDC, because I am the founder and CEO. When I want to add a strategic move to the company, I think not in quarters or months in terms of just trying it out. I really want to adopt something and have it and create shareholder value for the decades to come. So having that track record in Bitcoin in the past, 10, 12 years is also really important for me.
Can't be easy to balance, right? Like the mindset of like, how do I sustain this company, right, while still like potentially innovating, right, and coming up with other new and exciting things to keep this track record of like operational excellence going, right? So it's how do you balance those in your mind? And there must be a lot to consider with all
Mhm.
of that.
Building a business is really, really, truly a marathon and not a sprint. And then if I were to tell my 30-year-old self that, oh, you're embarking on this journey, it's going to be in 12 years before you list on the New York Stock Exchange. And it's going to be, a multi-decade project. I think I didn't have that expectation when I was, younger. And I think over the years, I've really learned to adjust that mindset, right? I think it's especially in the beginning when I first started out, we were, going after, I was very fortunate when we first started, besides my own startup funding, I also had some very close friends and my previous bosses at the bank also were my angel investors. And then later on, after building out DDC, for a couple of years, I attracted, venture capital to invest as well. And I think at that stage or those early years of DDC, my mindset was still relatively shorter term because like I was still learning to kind of report our performance to investors that also probably think shorter term as well. And I think over the years, I learned to really think about the business in terms of how I want to build it, and really understanding that perspective of DDC is something truly unique that I have almost total control in terms of how I want to build out this company, build out this ecosystem, rather than, as a young entrepreneur, it's easy to tend to listen to a lot of noises and say, oh, other founders are doing this, other people are in the VC space are doing this. And then you want to compare yourself to others. And I think it took me probably at least, I would say, 6, 7 years to kind of change that mindset and really understand, no, like zone out all the noises and really focus in terms of what I want to build and how I want to present this company to the to the investing community, and really find investors that also share that medium to long term vision, rather than kind of, changing or adopting yourself to fit into others, expectation of what you should be. So I think it takes time to kind of change that. And now, definitely have a much higher awareness in terms of my position and what I strategically should bring to the company and how I present this to investors. And my mindset is definitely thinking in terms of not quarters, but years, probably 3 to 5 years at a time, and how these decisions will continue to allow DDC to grow for the decades ahead.
I'm curious, what were some of the more like impactful, maybe mentors or advocates you had during this period of time when you were trying to figure all of this stuff out? And kind of what sort of advice did they give you that was very valuable at those stages?
It's so true that, a lot of times we have self-doubt and negative thoughts and like negative self-talk. And I think a lot of times women tends to have generalizing here, but like women tends to also have those voices in our head a lot. And I think I'm very fortunate over the years I've had a group of good supporters and mentors to kind of guide me. And if I think back, probably, two person and two moments that stick out in my head right now in terms of like that have lasting impacts in terms of when I have these self-doubt moments, how do I pull myself out and get myself out of those situations? I think the first one is very early on when I first started DDC. One of my other he's a serial entrepreneur, and I was telling him this is what I'm building, a cooking website, and we're gonna have some media partners. And he told me, one thing is do your best, forget the rest. Super cheesy, super cheesy, but it works. And I think sometimes, when we always ask ourselves and question, like, am I good enough? Am I the right person to do this? Oh, did I do that podcast perfectly? Right? Is always asking us, questioning our ability. I think this short little model really is important. It's like, forget about all these self-doubts. It's like, ask yourself, did you give 110% during that moment and making that decision and day to day when when you bring yourself to work? And if you have done that, then that's all that matters, right? And so that's one thing. And it carried me, through many different moments throughout the past, 14 years. Second, I think advice and mentor was someone from a very early investor. I think he was a round investor back in 2015. And he also himself as a very successful entrepreneur, started, founded, and listed multiple companies. And one thing he told me in 2016, which at that time I totally didn't get it. And it took me a few years to really look back and say, whoa, Joe was right. Okay, that was he told me like, Norma, you're so busy as a founder and entrepreneurs are under a lot of stress all the time. He's like, take a moment every day to think and just sit there and meditate. And 2016, I was 10 years younger. And so at that time, I'm like, I don't need to rest. I don't need to slow down. Like, why would I want to sit there and think? And so I didn't take that advice until probably a few years later. And I started, my changing kind of my daily routine, right? Getting a little bit burnout. And so I was like, okay, maybe I take time to kind of take care of myself better so I can continue on this marathon. I really started incorporating my really long, like I do my 10 kilometers or 6 miles walk every day.
Wow.
And that's kind of when I start incorporating these, you can think about it as like walking meditation, just time to reflect. And then I realize it really changes my own perspective and it gives time for self-reflection and self-growth and awareness. And that has completely really changed I think it probably make my career last longer. And as a founder, I think I'm also in much better shape now, mentally, physically, and so I can take on more challenges just because changing that little thing about taking time for myself in the morning and just think and meditate.
I focused a little bit in the beginning on just the fact that the women aspect of this, right, and it being International Women's Week and you being such a pioneer in the digital asset treasury space. Are you seeing more women entering this space? Are you seeing just more curiosity come from women about digital assets and how, right, it can be used in corporate strategies and things like that?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin itself, especially the early adopters, I think tend to be male dominated, right? Because it was so tech driven. But now, and I think over the years, because there are a lot of people in the space, women pioneer in the space that have been doing a lot of things to really promote more female participation. For example, Natalie Brunell, she's amazing, and she's hosting this, women Bitcoin events every year at the largest Bitcoin conference, to really gather, women participants together, right, to share experiences and also inspire potentially newcomers into this space. So I cannot take any credit for that. I think there's so many women that's done an incredible job in terms of promoting female participation in Bitcoin. In terms of what I see now as I joined the community in a broader sense in the most recent, year, I think there are a lot more opportunities for women, and also there are more women being probably curious and interested just because there are more access to the content and also more access in terms to the narrative. And also now you have ETFs, we have also, digital asset treasury companies that make access, or even nowadays if you're curious or you want to experiment a little bit in terms of adding Bitcoin exposure to your own investment portfolio is a lot easier. So I think all those things matters, right? Structurally, the nature is changing, and the access to Bitcoin as an investment is becoming more available. And I think little things matter. Like I remember last summer, I was on a trip in Lisbon. And I was invited to like a local friend's gathering at her place, and it was a group of women at the table, and they're all mostly business owners and and senior executives. And, I am always being asked, like, what do you do? Right. And I'm like, I'm in food and Bitcoin. And that's like the perfect answer. And so that also got everybody in the table very interested. What do you mean by food and Bitcoin? And so I shared my journey. And I got a few, LinkedIn messages afterwards and emails saying, oh, I'm really inspired and also very curious to learn more about Bitcoin after having met you over dinner. And then they asked me, like, oh, are there any podcasts or books that I read that got me really interested in it? And so I sent them, Natalie Burnell's podcast. um, and so, I think every little interaction counts, and you never know, what our experience can, lead to other experiences.
Are there any other things you can think of that might help more women or encourage more women to enter this space?
So you are probably the first external party that we're sharing this with. So we are launching a Bitcoin cooking show. We are launching a Bitcoin cooking show. I think the first episode's going to air in the first week of April. You're literally the first one outside of DDC to know this. We are breaking this news here.
I love this.
Um,
Live.
yeah.
Hot.
So, yeah, the way we see it is like the same thing with accessibility, right? And making Bitcoin like less mysterious. And so we would just want to create more like lifestyle and light-hearted content that kind of showcase for our show. We really showcase relevant and important individuals in the Bitcoin ecosystem and just sharing their journey. So the show itself, of course, there's a lot of cooking, there's fun recipes to be shared. Also, probably 75-80% about the person's upbringing, right? Their culture, what influenced them to get, what led them to Bitcoin, and less about Bitcoin itself. And I think content like that, hopefully, our goal is to attract more people to have curiosity, to want to learn more about Bitcoin and just to hear more about it, and in a setting where they feel like it's relatable.
Yeah, I mean, there's no better way to get people to open
Mm.
up than over, like, a good meal, good glass of wine, right? And you're just, like, in a very
Absolutely.
comfortable space, and, like, that's where all the best conversations happen, right? Like, over a dinner
Totally.
table or something. So that's
Yeah.
that's
And
such a
kind
great
of,
idea.
yes. And kind of hear about it in a setting where it's like, oh, it's not so mysterious, we're just regular people.
That's so exciting. Congratulations on kicking that off.
Thank you.
Generally, I'm curious, like, what kind of excites you about the potential and the future of Bitcoin and the impact that it can have on, not just you and your company, but, like, the industry as a whole?
2025 was an amazing year. We saw a lot of structural changes, regulatory improvement, clarity coming into play. I think when I look into the future, what excites me is like 2021, when I invested, it was experimental. And I think Bitcoin back then, for a lot of investors and senior managements, are also an experimental asset. But that's really changed now. In 2026, if you look into it, it's more of a more accepted asset class, especially when we think about corporate treasury management. And I think that is exciting because when we look at DATs or digital asset treasury companies, we in the space think like, oh, there's so many of us here. But if you think about the broader sense of like how many public companies are there globally, we're still a very, very tiny percentage. And so we're still at the very, very beginning stage of what DAT or what digital asset treasury could really means. So I think that we are at a very great time right now for more companies to come into the space so we can grow together, we can learn together, and continue to further develop the space. In crypto, everything's happened so fast. So everyone got really excited, everything cooled down so quickly. In TradFi market, that might take a year or two, right? Or maybe 12 to 18 months. But here it's like every quarter it shifts that sentiment. So we feel like we've lived through a very long cycle. But if you look back, like even for DDC, we haven't even adopted Bitcoin Treasury for a full year. Like we adopted in May last year. Now we're still in March. But of course, a lot has happened and really transformed DDC in so many different ways. But we're still so early.
Yeah, and I mean, you guys have been pretty aggressively, like, working on your strategy or your accumulation and stacking essentially, and I guess I haven't checked, but, like, where are you with the latest there in terms of your treasury right now?
So we ended 2025 with 1,183 Bitcoin. Now, today, we have 2,183 Bitcoin. So we almost doubled our Bitcoin holdings in the first, 2.5 months this year. So yeah, we've been, staying focused, just continue to keep stacking consistently.
And then I wanted to ask kind of your thoughts too, thinking like more about like what excites you the future, but like what are you excited about in terms of seeing like maybe the next generation of like leaders coming into the space or women leaders specifically and the challenges they'll face or the challenges they'll solve even.
I think it will be great eventually when we get to a stage where people don't even notice that, oh, she's a that's a female CEO in the space, or like, there's a female founder that got into Bitcoin treasury. So there should be so many of us already in the space that we don't stand out. I think that would be a great place to get to. And, there's so many similarities. I mean, when I first started DDC 2012, right? Out of Hong Kong, and then later expanding to mainland China market. Also very, 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 very few female founders. And, the same thing, right? We only get such a small percentage of venture capital funding as female founders. But, for me, I tend to think about things like I remember meeting so many investors early on, right? Just trying to get the pre-A round funding, A round funding, and so on and so forth. A lot of times, my friends might be saying, "Oh, did they not invest?" So it's probably because female founders are so hard to get money. For me, I don't want to default and think that, oh, that's because I'm a female founder, right? I don't want to have that default setting in my mind. Instead, I just want to think about it as, maybe I need to continue to fine tune the business model, right? Continue to fine tune my pitch and work on it better, work on it harder, and just don't stop until I meet that investor that will invest, that share the same vision. And I think that same thing applies here to Bitcoin for women now and in the future. We just gotta keep knocking on the doors, right? And just keep getting ourselves in there until and make it happen until it does. We're just gonna keep going at it. And I think that's the mindset that a lot of times we have, right? As women, we are very resilient, and I think that perseverance is important.
No, this has really been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it. And yeah, I can't wait to see what's next for you and DDC.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here.